Afternoon, and we're still debating the disaster, according to the front pages, that Labour seem to be having with the economy. Richard Murphy is a former chartered accountant and political economist. So, hi there, Richard. We just heard from Jonathan List there, and although he doesn't absolutely agree with everything that Labour have done, fair play to him, he says that the winter fuel payment was a mistake and alienating pensioners didn't work. He certainly didn't think that those huge public sector pay rises were a mistake, and has made the point that actually the Tories didn't have much growth. They were handed an economy that was hardly, supercharged, and that actually all of these difficult decisions needed to be made. What's your view on that?
I think Jonathan understated his case, and you got almost everything wrong. I would be happy to say that. Let's start with inflation that you started with. The Bank of England forecast in February this year that inflation in November would be higher than the periods either side of it, and it was. And we knew it was going to happen because if you understood how inflation is calculated, Cristo, and you clearly don't, you know that it's an index, and it's the consequence of what happened a year ago that created the hike this year. There'll be another little problem in January, and then the Bank of England says that the rate will fall steadily through 2025, and I strongly suspect it will. So all of your talk about this being something to do with Labour and those pay rises is complete nonsense. It has nothing whatsoever to do with it.
Pay rises,
can I make something clear here?
Can I just ask you about that? Because you said that I don't know what I'm talking about, so I think it's fair that I have a question off the back of that, if you don't mind. Are you saying that the huge pay rises, wages going up, don't create an environment of inflation?
Let's explain why that would be impossible, Cristo. Do you pay for a state education? The answer is no. Do you pay when you go to the NHS? The answer is no. Do you pay when you have social care from a local authority? In most cases, the answer is no. There is no price on those things, and inflation is a measure of price increases. Those things are provided free. Therefore, a wage increase for a civil servant cannot create an inflationary environment, except as a consequence of there being more money to spend in the economy. And the more money that was spent in the economy would be spent on private sector activity, which is the great consequence of these pay rises. But I want there to be teachers, I want there to be civil servants, I want there to be nurses, I want there to be doctors, and so on. And if you don't, you've got some really big problem, because you basically don't want society as we know it. I do, and those people were underpaid. And so my argument is they needed their pay rises, or we could not have functioned as a society. If you want societal breakdown, go your way, Cristo.
Well, I mean, perhaps there would be something a little bit in between, but do those people who would have then been given those big pay rises, do they not then potentially spend that money in the private sector, meaning that would lead to the inflation that comes from the private sector that you just outlined?
But I just told you, the Bank of England is forecasting that throughout 2025...
No, fine. I take that point, but you asserted that I don't know how inflation occurs, so
Cristo,
therefore I'm asking, if you give pay rises to people in the public sector, and you say inflation comes as a result of what's happening, I guess, more in the private sector, well, if they spend their money in the private sector by going to supermarkets, going to shops, going and doing all of these things, and they have more money to spend in those areas, won't that lead to inflation going up?
Only in one circumstance, Cristo, which you've already said in your introduction to this interview isn't the case, and that would be when there was a hyper-fast growing economy with full employment and everybody was working to the max. In that case, if you give pay rises above the rate of growth of productivity, then you will get inflation. Otherwise, you can't, because there is the capacity in the economy to deliver growth without forcing up wages, because there are people available to be employed. And we know there are people available to be employed. There are lots of young people out of work. There are lots of people who at the moment aren't being supported back into work. So therefore, your proposition that this is going to be inflationary just can't be supported by the facts or economic theory. None of it makes any sense, Cristo. Sorry.
Okay, so then why do you think then that and you're saying that there was a prediction, great. Why do you think that inflation is going back up, and why do you think that the economy is, according to the CBI and according to all of these other people, not doing very well?
Oh, those are two different questions.
Yes.
Inflation went back up simply because of the way in which inflation is calculated. There was a big drop in November 2023. The consequence was in November 2024, the data simply had to show an increase. It's simple maths, straightforward, and nothing more complicated than that. There was no real increase at all. It was a minor bump. The figures, as Jonathan correctly said, are near enough 2%, and you can never get it exactly right. It will go down towards 2% during the course of 2025. Basically, it's a matter of mathematical fact. It's going to happen unless there's a world disaster of some sort, and that could create inflation, but Labour couldn't. Is Labour doing well, though? No, Labour's doing really badly. Let's agree on something, shall we? Labour is not doing well. It's absolutely making a complete hash of this. But the reason why is that it failed to do something that was glaringly obviously necessary. It didn't spend enough extra money into the economy to deliver growth, Cristo. Simple, straightforward fact. Our private sector, and I've worked in our private sector. I've been a chartered accountant for 42 years. I was a senior partner of a firm of accountants before I became an academic. There are too few ideas in our private sector, and almost none of our big businesses are actually interested in making products that people want to buy. They're only interested in financial engineering. The whole political capital of our private sector is utterly bankrupt. They don't know what they're doing. The best that they can think of is to try and outsource some government services and try and bid for those. So we see the utter disaster of things like Thames Water, which is a private sector activity which you would love, but which doesn't work very obviously. And instead, what the government should have done is the only thing...
Hang on. How do you know that I would love Thames Water?
You like the private sector instead of the state sector. So the only thing that the government should have done now is spend more money. Spend more money on things that people really need. Better healthcare, better education, the things that would actually transform well-being in our society.
Do you think that you're able, Richard, to put across your case without, firstly, assuming what I might think of something, or second, actually being... as Steve is putting, like arrogant, condescending and quite rude? Because you've been quite rude about the way in which you think I think inflation works, but more importantly, you have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to my view.
Did you have any idea how rude you were to Jonathan Liss?
Let me finish. You have no idea what I think of Thames Water, for which I have said on many occasions that a privatised monopoly does not work. The whole point of privatisation is so that consumers have choice. And actually, I don't believe that the privatisation that we have nowadays is actually how Thatcher, when she perceived it, is how it should have been. Now, secondly, Jonathan Liss is more than capable of telling me and putting me in my place if he needs to. He's a person that I have known for probably about a decade, and we have done these many, many times. So I really don't think he needs you cheerleading for him. And thirdly, I would suggest that if you want to put your point across, you would perhaps not make assumptions about what I think about things, because I think Thames Water and those privatised water utilities that are monopolies are ridiculous and wrong.
OK, but Thatcher designed that style of privatisation. If you understand, again, anything about privatisation, you would understand that actually Thatcher created regulated capitalism.
And she was wrong.
And she was wrong. Yeah, but we have lived for 45 years with this false view of how the economy should be run. The state should be bigger. The state should be meeting need. And then we wouldn't have children who are suffering from anxiety. We wouldn't have young people who are absolutely unable to face the world of work, because that's what we've got, because they can't get the health care they need to support them back into work. We wouldn't have people who are waiting for so long for healthcare that they are unable to work as well. We would have real growth. But Labour didn't spend enough. And why do I say I think you think these things? Because you work for talkTV.
So we can have a different view when you work for talkTV. You're not told what to say here. I happen to think Thatcher did some absolutely great things, but I think on the concept of where we are with privatisation today, it is not working, especially not in things that are monopoly.
Cristo. Shall we agree on that? Shall we nationalise the energy supply industry?
Not the entire energy supply industry. Not the entire energy supply industry. Where there is competition, I think that it could be potentially reformed. But when it comes to water, where it is a monopoly, then I do think there is an argument that at least if it was nationalised, you would then be able to vote out the government, or you in some way bring in a method where you can have some sort of competition so people get some sort of choice. Now,
how can you have competition through a water pipe.
Oh, sorry. Well, how can you can have the same sort of? You can ask the same sort of question about how you can have competition through the same meter that you've got. And
you can't. That's what the whole point. You can't. It's impossible. It's the same electricity, so you can't have competition.
And that's a perfect argument. But I'm just waiting 1 second because the bosses of talkTV are just in my ear now saying, "Oh, I've said the wrong thing. I'm afraid there, Richard. I've been told that I'm going to be unable to do the rest of the show now because I have a line I'm supposed to give on privatisation."
Excellent.
People can have different opinions on talkTV, Richard.
Look, I don't follow talkTV very much, so you can tell me I don't know what you're talking about. But I saw,
it shows.
Christo, listen to me for a second. I saw how rude you were to Jonathan.
I wasn't rude to Jonathan.
Now you're telling me that I'm rude. I'm sorry, I don't accept that. You were rude to him. I'm being robust with you because you were so rude and condescending to him when he went off air, and you said you only like him when you're drunk. If that's your attitude,
and he laughed at that.
Don't invite me back, because I like talking to rational people, and you're talking a load of economic nonsense here. And I'm expected to engage with you. I accepted the invitation in good faith.
You do not know my relationship with Jonathan Liss. Jonathan Liss has come in and done my show at 5 o'clock in the morning for years, and we have bantered like that so many times. So since when did you become the gatekeeper of what I'm allowed to say to guests that I've known for the best part of a decade?
This is public broadcasting.
I tell you what, Richard, if it's so offensive to you, then we'll say goodbye. Thank you very much and have a lovely Christmas. But I won't be told by you what I can say and what I can't say to my guests. And I think that might be the very first time I've ever thrown a guest off talkTV. But what an insufferable, condescending, pious prig that man is.